Deceit in the family, the fight for the legacy. It's hard to put into words the feeling that settled in my chest when I first started noticing the changes. I never thought I'd be in a situation like this, questioning everything I thought I knew about my family, especially my dad. But here I am, and I can't shake the feeling that something is wrong. My name is Ethan. Growing up, I was always close with my dad, Daniel. He was a quiet man, one of those types who doesn't say much, but when he speaks, you know it's important. After my mom passed away, it was just the two of us. We didn't need to say much, we just understood each other. We had our routine, and it was comforting. I could always rely on him, and I like to think he could rely on me too. But then Rebecca came into the picture. Rebecca was everything my dad needed at the time, or so I thought. She was warm, always smiling, and seemed to make him happy. At first, I was relieved. He had been so lonely after Mom's death, and if she could bring him some joy, then I would support it. She was the kind of person who could light up a room, and my dad seemed lighter, more optimistic in her presence. I thought maybe this was good for him. Maybe he deserved to find happiness again. But over time, I started noticing things that didn't sit right with me. Little comments here and there, casual remarks that seemed harmless at first. But when Rebecca said, "I'm just so glad Daniel has someone who can really take care of him now," it left a strange feeling in my stomach. She said it like it was nothing, but the words felt deliberate, as if she was trying to remind everyone of her role in my dad's life. I never thought much of it at first. Maybe I was overthinking it. But then one evening something happened that I couldn't ignore. It was just a casual dinner with Dad, and everything seemed fine until he asked me a question that stopped me in my tracks. He looked me right in the eye and said, "Ethan, are you upset with me?" I blinked, unsure of what to say. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. He looked down, fidgeting with his fork. "I just feel like maybe I haven't done enough for you lately." That wasn't like him. My dad was never one to fish for reassurance. He wasn't the type to question himself like that, especially not in the middle of a quiet dinner. I told him everything was fine, but deep down I couldn't shake the unease that settled over me. Why would he be asking that? What had changed? It wasn't until a few weeks later, when I overheard a conversation between Rebecca and Dad, that I began to piece things together. I wasn't trying to listen, but their voices carried, and what I heard made my stomach drop. Rebecca said, "Ethan just doesn't seem to appreciate you, Daniel. Maybe he doesn't need you as much as you think he does." I froze. The words echoed in my mind, and I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Why would she say that? Where was this coming from? What did she mean by "doesn't need you"? It hit me then, something was off. I wasn't sure what it was, but I had to find out. The days that followed felt strange. At first, I told myself I was overthinking things, that maybe I was just paranoid. But the unease only grew. My dad, Daniel, wasn't the type to open up about his feelings. He wasn't the kind of man to ask if he'd done enough for me. So why was he suddenly questioning everything? It started with small things, subtle shifts in our usual routine. Our Saturday lunches, something we'd done for years, began to get canceled more and more. "I've got a lot on my plate, Ethan," he'd say. "Rebecca's planning something for us today." I'd nod, trying to hide my frustration, but it stung. I missed those moments with him, the quiet conversations, the simple connection we had. I tried to brush it off, but it happened again. And again. Week after week, Dad seemed more distant. At first, it was just the lunches, then the phone calls started to feel less personal. He'd give me short answers when I asked about his day, and I could sense something in his tone, something cold and distant. It wasn't like him. Then came that evening. I dropped by his house unannounced, hoping to have a conversation like we used to. But as soon as I walked in, I felt it. The air was different, like it wasn't really my home anymore. There was Rebecca, smiling at me from the kitchen, acting like everything was normal, but her smile felt forced. The moment I sat down, my dad walked in, looked at me, and then glanced at Rebecca before saying, "Ethan, are we okay?" The question hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just the words, it was the look in his eyes. There was something there, a hesitance, a doubt, like he wasn't sure if I was still the son he knew. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shifted uncomfortably, looking away. I feel like maybe I've been neglecting you lately. Maybe I haven't been there for you the way I should have been." I didn't know how to respond. My dad, the man who had always been my rock, was suddenly questioning everything we had built. "Dad, you don't need to worry. Everything's fine," I said, trying to sound reassuring, but deep down I could feel something was breaking. Something between us was slipping through my fingers. But it didn't stop there. The next few days I found myself replaying that moment over and over in my mind. I started noticing more and more little signs that something wasn't right. I'd call him and he'd pick up, but there was a coolness in his voice that wasn't there before. His answers felt rehearsed, like he was reading from a script. I tried to reach out to talk about the things we used to, but he'd shut me down, saying he was too busy with Rebecca. It wasn't until that afternoon when I overheard their conversation that everything came crashing down. I was in the kitchen just putting a cup away when I heard Rebecca's voice through the wall. "Ethan doesn't seem to need you as much as he thinks he does," she said, her voice dripping with a false sweetness. "Maybe he doesn't need you at all, Daniel." I froze. My heart raced. I wanted to burst through that door and confront them both, but I didn't. I couldn't. Something about the way she said it felt like a calculated jab, like she was trying to plant a seed in my dad's mind, trying to convince him that I wasn't as important to him as I once was. I didn't know what to do with that information. I didn't know how to confront my dad without making things worse. All I could do was sit there, hurt, betrayed, and unsure of how to fix it. Rebecca's manipulation was so subtle, so quiet, that I almost didn't see it coming. But now it was clear, she was working on him, inch by inch, turning him against me without me even realizing. The tension in the air felt thicker than ever. Every interaction with my dad felt like walking on eggshells, unsure of where we stood. And as Rebecca's influence grew, so did the distance between my father and me. I couldn't help but wonder, was I losing him? Had she already won? I didn't have answers yet. But I knew one thing for sure, things were never going to be the same. I should have known it was coming, but I couldn't prepare myself for the gut punch I received that day. It was a call from Uncle Paul that changed everything. He wasn't the kind of guy to get involved in family drama, but when he reached out to me with an urgent tone, I knew something was wrong. "Ethan," he said, his voice low, "I don't know how to say this, but I heard something that doesn't sit right with me." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What is it, Uncle Paul?" He paused, and when he spoke again, his words hit me like a ton of bricks. "I've heard your dad might be planning to transfer the estate. All of it. To Rebecca's kids." The words didn't register at first. The family estate, the land that had been passed down through generations, the place where my mother and father had built their life together, gone? My heart dropped into my stomach. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You need to be careful, Ethan. If what I'm hearing is true, you might not have a say in this." I barely remember what happened after that. All I could hear in my head was the echo of Uncle Paul's warning, replaying over and over again like a broken record. The idea that my dad, the man who had always been my rock, would give away everything, to Rebecca's kids no less, felt like a betrayal too big to fathom. I couldn't just sit back and let this happen. I had to know for sure. The next day, I found myself standing at my dad's door, not knowing what to expect. I had to ask him about the estate, about everything. He greeted me with a forced smile, but the moment I stepped inside, I could feel the distance between us, like an invisible wall was growing taller and taller. "Dad," I began, my voice steady but with an edge of fear I couldn't hide, "I need to talk to you about the estate. Are you planning to make any changes?" He stiffened, but it wasn't the reaction I expected. Instead of offering any explanation, he just gave me a tight smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Ethan," he said, almost too calmly, "you don't need to worry about this. It's all being taken care of." His words stung, but it wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. As if I wasn't even a part of the decision. As if the estate, the family legacy, wasn't something I had any claim to anymore. He dismissed me with the wave of a hand, and just like that, my worst fears started to feel real. I tried to press further, but he wouldn't engage. Every question I asked was met with vague answers and an unsettling lack of transparency. And that was it, he shut the door on the conversation on me in a way that made my blood boil. It was clear, I wasn't welcome in the discussion anymore. But I couldn't stop there. I needed answers. If my father wasn't going to tell me, I'd find out on my own. A few days later, I dropped by again, pretending to be casual, just wanting to check in. But the moment I walked through that door, I felt something shift in the air. The house felt different, emptier, even though Rebecca was in the kitchen. She greeted me with that perfect smile of hers, the one that never quite reached her eyes. There was something cold behind it, something I couldn't shake. I wandered into the living room, trying to make myself seem at ease. But then my eyes landed on the table. Papers. Stacks of them. And the top sheet was unmistakable, transfer of ownership. My stomach churned as I walked over, pretending to glance at a magazine, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the documents. It wasn't just any transfer. It was the estate. The family estate. The one that had been passed down for generations. And at the top of the list, the beneficiaries were clear, Sarah and Thomas, Rebecca's kids. My pulse raced, my vision blurred. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me, like the rug had been pulled out from under me and I was falling. There was the proof. The betrayal wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was real. I didn't know how to react. I couldn't confront Rebecca, not with her standing there. But as I stepped back, my mind was racing. This wasn't just about the land anymore. It wasn't just about the estate. This was about everything, the relationship with my dad, the trust one had in him, everything I thought was unshakable. I waited for my dad to come home, and when he did, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Dad, why are Rebecca's kids listed as beneficiaries? What's going on?" He froze, his face pale, and in that moment I saw it. The truth was written all over him. He looked lost, like he didn't even recognize himself anymore. "Ethan," he muttered, his voice strained, it's just what makes sense. You've always been independent. You don't need the estate. They need it more." That was it. That was the moment everything changed. My dad, the man who had promised to always protect me, had just handed it all over. He wasn't even fighting for it. The words he spoke felt like a knife in my chest, and the weight of the betrayal hit me harder than I could have imagined. Rebecca had won. She had manipulated him slowly but surely until he didn't even see the damage she was doing. The family estate wasn't just a piece of land, it was our history, our legacy. And now it was slipping through my fingers. I didn't know what to do. I was angry, I was hurt, and I felt more alone than I ever had before. How had it come to this? How had my father let it all happen? I couldn't just walk away. I had to fight for what was rightfully mine, for what was rightfully ours. And I knew this was just the beginning of a battle I wasn't prepared for. But I couldn't let Rebecca win, not this time. The air in the house felt thick with tension when I walked in that afternoon. I had waited for the right moment, but the more I thought about it, the less I cared about waiting. It was time to confront my father. I couldn't stand by any longer watching as Rebecca twisted everything we had worked for into something that didn't belong to us. I had to make him see it no matter what. I found him in the study, sitting at his desk, his back to me. He didn't turn when I walked in, but I could feel his awareness of my presence, the unease hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I didn't waste time. "Dad, we need to talk. About the estate. About everything," I said, my voice steady but filled with the frustration I'd been holding in for weeks. He turned slowly, looking at me with those tired eyes, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in them. Guilt, regret, maybe even fear. But it was gone as quickly as it came. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Ethan, not this again. I told you everything is fine. You don't need to worry about this." I could feel the anger rising inside me, but I kept my voice calm. "No, Dad, you don't get it. Rebecca has been manipulating you into making decisions you don't even understand. This isn't just about fairness. It's about control. She's controlling you, and she's about to take everything from us." His face hardened, his jaw tightening as though he was holding something back. "Don't talk about her like that," he snapped, his voice sharp. "She's been nothing but good to me. She's made me feel like I have a future again. She's taking care of me when no one else has." I could feel the sting of his words like a slap to the face. "Taking care of you? Or taking advantage of you?" I shot back, unable to hold it in any longer. "Do you even realize what she's doing? She's convinced you to give the estate to her kids. Your own son is being pushed aside, and you don't even see it." His face softened, but there was still a distant look in his eyes. "It's fair, Ethan. She has her children to think about. They don't have what you've had. They need this." I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. How could he not see it? "Fair? You're talking about fairness? This isn't fairness, Dad. This is manipulation, pure and simple. Rebecca's using you to get what she wants, and you're letting her. You've always taught me about loyalty, about family. And now you're handing everything over to people who've barely been in your life. How is that fair?" I could feel my chest tightening, my breath coming in short bursts. "You're my father. I'm your son. You should trust me more than her. She doesn't care about this family like you do. She's using you to get what she wants, and you're letting her. I'm not going to sit back and watch this happen." Daniel's face faltered. I saw the conflict there, the internal struggle that had been building for so long. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. I don't know what's right anymore, Ethan. She made me believe this was the right thing to do. She said it was the fair thing to do. I've been so alone for so long, and she's been there for me." I took a step forward, my voice softening, though the hurt was still raw. "Dad, I'm here. I've always been here. You don't have to do this. You don't have to give away everything that's ours for her. Please, just listen to me." He looked away, his eyes clouded with doubt. And then, Just as the words hung in the air, Rebecca walked in. Her presence seemed to fill the room, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flash of something sinister in her smile. She didn't even acknowledge me. Instead, she turned to Daniel, her voice smooth and practiced. "Edward, you don't need to explain yourself to him. You've made the decision. It's for the best, and I'm sure Ethan will understand." I stood there, fury burning through me. Understand? Understand. I couldn't contain it any longer. "I'll never understand this, and I'll never accept it. You've taken my father from me, and now you're taking everything else. But I won't let you do this. Not without a fight." Rebecca's smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly regained her composure. "You need to let this go, Ethan. This is what's best for everyone." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, trying to make sense of the mess I was in. "No, this isn't over. Not by a long shot. I'm going to get to the bottom of this, and I'm going to make sure you don't get away with it. You won't take what's rightfully mine, and you won't take my father away from me." Rebecca's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. She didn't have to. I could see the victory in her eyes, the feeling that she had already won. But she hadn't. Not yet. Not while I was still breathing. I turned to Daniel one last time, my heart aching. "You've got one last chance, Dad. You can fix this. You can see what she's really doing. But if you don't, I'll do whatever it takes to protect what's ours." I walked out of the room, leaving behind a broken silence, my mind racing. I didn't know how I was going to fix this or what the next steps would be. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't giving up. I wasn't going to let Rebecca destroy everything. Not without a fight. I couldn't stop thinking about that confrontation. The anger, the betrayal. It was still fresh in my mind, but something in me had shifted. I knew I couldn't just charge in without a plan. I had to be smart about this, take a step back and think. I needed leverage, something I could use to take control of the situation, to make sure that Rebecca's manipulation didn't win. That's when I remembered something my Uncle Paul had said a long time ago, during one of our rare, quiet conversations. He'd mentioned the family estate deed and how it had a safeguard clause, a kind of failsafe that could prevent the land from being transferred if the new beneficiaries didn't meet certain conditions. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. After all, the estate had always been ours, something we'd all take care of together. But now, with Rebecca working to strip it away, that safeguard could be my only chance to stop her. I immediately called Paul. When he answered, I could hear the worry in his voice, the same tension I felt in my chest. "Paul, I need to know about that clause in the deed. The one that can stop the transfer. Does it still hold?" There was a long pause on the other end, and then Paul's voice lowered, almost a whisper. "It's still there. It's always been there. But your father doesn't know about it, Ethan. Rebecca's kept him in the dark. If the new beneficiaries don't meet the requirements, the estate reverts back to you." Relief flooded through me, but it was quickly replaced by determination. I wasn't going to waste this opportunity. I had to test Rebecca, make sure she didn't know about the clause before I moved forward. If she didn't, that could be the key to unraveling her entire plan. The next day, I visited my dad again, trying to act as normal as possible. I knew Rebecca wouldn't be around, and this was my chance. I casually brought up the estate again, this time with a different approach. "Dad, I was thinking about the family property. I remember you mentioning the clause in the deed that prevents the transfer if the new owners don't follow certain rules. Do you still remember that?" First, Daniel didn't react. But then I saw it, the brief flash of confusion in his eyes. He looked down, avoiding my gaze. I'm not sure," he muttered, his voice weak. "I think Rebecca and I have talked about it, but it's all so complicated now." That was all I needed to hear. It confirmed what I had suspected. Rebecca had kept him in the dark about the clause, hoping he wouldn't notice it or, worse, wouldn't care enough to ask. It was a calculated risk on her part and one that was about to blow up in her face. I walked away, my heart racing. I now had the upper hand, but I had to be careful. If I revealed everything too soon, I risked losing any advantage I had. I bided my time, gathering as much evidence as I could. I kept track of Rebecca's actions, documenting every conversation, every slip-up, every moment where she pushed too far. I needed everything in place before I confronted her again. It wasn't just about the estate anymore, it was about taking back control of my life, of my family's future. Weeks passed and each day felt like an eternity. But then the day came. I had everything I needed, proof that Rebecca had been lying, manipulating my father, and keeping him in the dark about his own legacy. Armed with the documents, I called my Uncle Paul to make sure the legal side of things was airtight. He reassured me that the clause could still be enforced, that Rebecca couldn't undo it if we presented the evidence. It was time. I knew what I had to do. I walked into my dad's house with a sense of purpose, ready to confront Rebecca once and for all. This time, there would be no hiding, no manipulation. The truth was on my side and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. When I walked into the living room, I saw Rebecca sitting on the couch, looking too comfortable. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me, but she said nothing. Daniel was in the kitchen, just out of earshot, but I could feel the tension building. It was time. "Rebecca," I started, my voice calm but firm, "you've been hiding something from my father. Something important." Her smile faltered and I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about, Ethan," she said, trying to sound casual, but I could see through her. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, pulling out the paperwork I gathered. "The clause in the deed. The one that says the estate can't be transferred unless the new beneficiaries meet specific requirements. You didn't think I'd find out, did you?" Rebecca stood up quickly, her composure cracking. "That's irrelevant," she hissed. "You don't understand what's at stake here. This is for our future, Daniel's and mine." "No," I shot back, "this is for your future, not the family's." I turned to my father, who had come into the room, his face pale. "Dad, you've been lied to. She's been manipulating you, making you think you're doing what's fair. But this isn't fair. She's taken everything from you and now she's trying to take the one thing that's yours." Daniel stood still, his eyes flickering between us, uncertainty clouding his features. I could see him struggling, torn between his loyalty to Rebecca and the reality of what I was saying. I didn't give him time to speak. "The estate goes back to me, Dad. It has to. It's in the clause. You don't have to do this." Rebecca took a step forward, trying to intervene, but I stood my ground. "You've already lost, Rebecca. This isn't your game to win anymore." Her face twisted in anger, but I could see the defeat in her eyes now. She knew it was over. She had underestimated me, thought she could manipulate my father without anyone noticing. But the truth was always stronger than lies. The room was silent for a long moment before Daniel finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "I was wrong, Ethan," he said, his eyes finally meeting mine. "I didn't see it before. I didn't know how much she had been controlling me. For the first time in a long while, I saw my father, standing tall again. He wasn't just some man manipulated by lies. He was the man I had always known. And we were going to fix this together." As Rebecca turned and walked out of the room, her head held high but her shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't just about winning the estate back. It was about reclaiming our family, our future. The legacy wasn't gone. It wasn't lost. It was still here, and it would always be ours. The courtroom felt cold, the air thick with anticipation. It had all led to this moment, this final confrontation. Ethan stood beside his Uncle Paul, his heart pounding in his chest. Today, everything would be decided. No more running, no more manipulation. The truth would finally come to light. Rebecca sat across from them, her usual air of confidence now replaced by a brittle facade. She had her lawyer beside her, but Ethan wasn't worried. He knew they had the upper hand. Paul had carefully reviewed every legal detail and they had the documents to prove everything. The clause in the deed was clear and there was no way she could escape the truth this time. "I'm afraid you're mistaken," Rebecca said, her voice smooth but tinged with desperation. "The clause is outdated. It's not valid anymore. My lawyer can attest to that." She spoke as if the law could bend to her will, as if she could continue her game of manipulation without consequence. Paul didn't flinch. He was a man of few words, but his presence commanded respect. He stood tall, his voice calm yet firm. "Actually, Rebecca, the clause is still in full effect, and I can assure you that it is legally binding. If the new beneficiaries don't meet the conditions outlined in the deed, the estate reverts to Ethan." Rebecca's face flushed, her eyes narrowing as she tried to hold her composure. But it was too late. The truth had already been set in motion and there was no stopping it now. The judge nodded, his expression stern as he turned to Rebecca's lawyer, who had no argument to counter the evidence. The ruling came swiftly. The estate would remain in Ethan's name, and Rebecca's attempts to claim it were nullified. As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the proceedings, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It was over. The battle was won. But the victory felt bittersweet. The family he once knew was fractured, and though he had reclaimed what was rightfully his, the cost was something he would carry for a long time. Rebecca stormed out of the courtroom without a word, but her defeat was evident. Ethan didn't watch her leave. He turned to Paul, who gave him a small nod of approval, and then to his father, Daniel, who had been sitting quietly by his side throughout the trial. The ride home was silent, the tension palpable. But when they arrived, Daniel turned to Ethan, his voice heavy with regret. "I'm sorry, son. I was blind. I didn't see it before, but now I know what I almost lost." His voice cracked, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan saw his father, vulnerable. The man who had always been so stoic, so strong, was finally showing the emotion that had been hidden beneath the surface for years. Ethan placed a hand on his father's shoulder, feeling the weight of everything they had been through. "We're still here, Dad. We'll rebuild. It's going to take time, but we'll make it work." Daniel nodded, his eyes brimming with unspoken emotion. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Ethan, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you." The next few weeks were filled with long conversations, rebuilding trust, and slowly, piece by piece, repairing the bond that had been damaged. It wasn't easy, but it was real. Ethan wasn't sure what the future would hold, but one thing was certain: his commitment to his family and their legacy had never been stronger. Then came the final twist. Months after the trial, a package arrived at Ethan's doorstep. Inside was a legal petition from Rebecca challenging the validity of the clause again, claiming it was discriminatory. But this time, the court dismissed her claims quickly. The judge ruled in their favor once more, and with that, Rebecca's last card had been played. Her attempts to undermine the family estate were over. But the shock didn't end there. As Ethan began to review the documents, he found something that made his blood run cold. Rebecca had been siphoning money from Daniel's accounts, making small withdrawals over the past few months. It wasn't enough to drain his father's finances completely, but it was enough to raise serious questions about her true intentions. Ethan confronted his father, who was devastated by the news. "I trusted her," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. "I trusted her more than I trusted you, Ethan. And now look what's happened." Ethan's heart ached for his father, but he knew that this was the final betrayal Rebecca had left behind. It wasn't just about the estate, it was about the years she had taken from them, the trust she had shattered, and the relationship she had almost destroyed. In the end, Rebecca and her children left, their presence a distant memory. The house felt quieter now, but in a way it was peaceful. The estate was safe, the legacy intact, and the family, though scarred, was beginning to heal. As Ethan stood by the window watching the sunset, he felt a sense of closure. He had fought for what was right, not just for the estate, but for his family. It had been a long, painful journey, but it had brought him closer to his father in a way he hadn't expected. They still had a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like they were finally on the right path. His family's legacy would remain. And this time, it would be built on trust, loyalty, and the unwavering bond that could never be broken again. As he looked out over the land, the place where his mother and father had built their lives together, Ethan knew that no matter what came next, he would protect this legacy with everything he had. And that was enough.